Okay, good afternoon to all our viewers on Parliament Channel and also on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM. I am Melissa Griffith, and I will serve as the Master of Ceremonies for today's press conference being put on by the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. This press conference is being held to highlight the issues and recommendations in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th reports of the committee. Firstly, I would like to introduce the members of the committee who are present. Seated second from right, we have the chairman, Mr. Wade Mark. Seated on the chairman's left, we have Mrs. Jennifer Baptiste-Primus. Seated left of Mrs. Jennifer Baptiste-Primus, we have Mr. Foster Cummings. And seated right of the chairman, we have Mr. David Small. At this point in time, I would like to turn the proceedings over to the chairman of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, Mr. Wade Mark.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And good afternoon to members of the media, my fellow committee members, members of the listening public. Of course, my name is Wade Mark, and I'm the chairman of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. Members of the media, during the second session of the 11th Parliament, the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee completed 5 public inquiries into the examination of the audited financial statements of the following state enterprises: Sport, CISL, CPEP, PAEC, and SWIMCOL. The 2 key inquiry objectives were: 1, to ensure that the policy of state enterprises is carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically, and whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. And 2, to ensure that the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of state enterprises conforms to the authority which governs it. Based on the evidence gathered, the committee identified the 4 trends across state enterprises, namely the limited capacity of the investments division of the Ministry of Finance to effectively oversee and monitor state enterprises. Another observation is the late submission of audited financial statements to Parliament. Another observation is the lack of approved strategic plans for the current period. And finally, the absence of an internal audit unit at these state enterprises. Now, there are some pervasive issues across state enterprises, and we have made, accordingly, the following recommendations. First pervasive issue deals with the role of the investments division of the Ministry of Finance, and we have submitted the following recommendations. 1, the investments division should be more proactive in its oversight responsibility through the conduct of regular site visits and the monitoring and evaluation of quarterly reports of all state enterprises. There should be a better communication strategy developed between our committee, the PAEC, and the investments division to enhance the oversight responsibility. This can be achieved by identifying an individual from the investments division to act as a liaison officer with the PAEC. We have also recommended that the Ministry of Finance Investments Division, as a matter of urgency, take the lead in ensuring that entities comply with the State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual. We have also recommended that the Ministry of Finance Investments Division should design a named official with responsibility for ensuring that State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual are adhered to deliver improved performance, accountability, and transparency, as well as value for money for the taxpayers. And finally, to strengthen accountability and monitoring, the Ministry of Finance Investments Division should ensure that all state enterprises prepare accountability report covering all of the accountability relationships and processes of each state enterprise. The second pervasive issue dealt with the late submission of audited financial statements. We have recommended as a committee the following. The Ministry of Finance should revise the process for the submission of audited financial statements. The Ministry of Finance Investments Division should collaborate with the Treasury Division no later than May the 30th, 2017, to determine ways of enforcing the guidelines outlined in the State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual, including strict financial sanctions that should be imposed in the event of non-compliance, and that the Investment Division should ensure that the performance standards for the accounting officers in the respective line ministries include the timely submission of reports to the Ministry of Finance, which also prevents the timely submission of these reports to Parliament. It would really facilitate, I should say, the timely submission of these reports to Parliament. And of course, the other pervasive issue dealt with the lack of approved strategic plans for the period under review. We are proposing that these entities should draft a new strategic plan as a matter of urgency for the period under review and have these plans approved by the respective line ministries. And finally, the absence of an internal audit unit. That is another pervasive issue that we have identified. And we have recommended that the entities or state enterprises should take immediate steps to create an internal audit unit and implement an internal audit function, and that line ministries should take urgent steps to employ an internal auditor forthwith for the respective entities concerned. These are some of the pervasive issues that we have identified concerning those entities that we have examined thus far. I will now call on the Honorable Jennifer Baptiste Primus, who will go into some of the unique characteristics that we have seen in some of these state enterprises. The Honorable Jennifer Baptiste Primus.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the media. The first state enterprise that I would focus on is a very familiar one, CPEP, with regards to various discrepancies identified in their financial statements. We have observed for the financial years 2009 to 2014, CPEP had a total zero balance, which meant that the company's revenue and its expenditure were identical every year for 6 years. Now, we all know that that certainly is a position that requires drilling down into. Suffice it to say, the committee's recommendations with regards to CPEP are as follows. 1, CPEP should immediately employ steps to implement proper financial accounting principles and standards. 2, The Auditor General's Department should take immediate steps to assist in implementing proper audit practices in CPEP. And 3, CPEP must adhere to the international financial reporting standards. And those are three basic recommendations that this committee has made with regards to improving the overall performance of CPEP. The second state enterprise is CISL. In this regard, the committee felt that it was unclear whether or not CISL was operating in accordance with its original mandate. CISL stated that its primary focus was on infrastructural development as opposed to social development. While training and development was seen as a secondary role for CISL, mechanisms were not put in place to ensure the training and development of persons in the communities in which CISL operated. As a matter of fact, that is one of CISL's core function, that is looking after communities. CISL attributed this shortcoming to a lack of funding for this initiative. The committee therefore forwarded 2 recommendations in this regard. Firstly, beginning May 2017, which is next month, CISL should adhere to its mandate and take steps to train and employ persons in communities in which the company undertakes projects. And 2, CISL's human resources policies should provide for the employment of community resources when engaging in new projects. Internal controls should be implemented to support these policies. There is a second aspect of our assessment of CISL, and it has to do with the very relevance of this company. The committee is of the view that services offered by CISL are provided by other ministries, departments, and state agencies such as the Ministry of Works and Transport, YTEP, regional corporations, just to name a few. Additionally, the entity in providing evidence to the committee stated that its communication strategy is what separates CISL from all other state agencies which can provide the same services. An effective communication strategy is an insufficient justification for CISL providing the same services as other state agencies. As a consequence, therefore, the committee's recommendation is as follows. The Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts should critically assess and revisit CISL's mandate and a report submitted to the PAEC no later than June 2017. In that context, Mr. Chairman, members of the media, those are the committee's views with regards to CPEP and CISL. Thank you very much.
This time I'll ask Mr. David Small to also bring to your attention some of the recommendations as it relates to some of the state enterprises that we have also examined. Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members of the media and the viewing audience looking on and listening in. Regarding the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago, one of the key what we consider to be a unique issue highlighted for that company during our examination is the frequent exchanges of chief executive officers. For the period 2004 to 2015, there were 7 CEOs at Sport, with 3 resigning and 3 being terminated. As a result of this instability in this key office, you found that annual general meetings, which would have normally been held to approve financial statements and other important decisions, could not be held on the regular schedule. And that had a knock-on effect in terms of the delivery of financial statements. And also it also impacted the company's ability to keep in terms of its construction deadlines. So what you found is that the company had changes of CEO, and what you would find is that a new CEO would come in, but he couldn't immediately hit the ground running. You would find that the CEO would take time to come up to speed to understand how to get the business running and get performing optimally. In addition to which, every CEO probably walks into an office or with his own view of how things should operate. And that requires a whole culture process. So the company really has suffered from having these frequent changes in CEO over this period of time. To deal with that, the company has put forward 3 recommendations. 1, the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs should conduct an extensive investigation into the causes of the high turnover rate of CEOs and generate a report, which would then be submitted to this committee by May 2017, so that the committee could deliberate further on what is the best way forward. 2, sport should implement an exit interview process to facilitate a proper and effective change in executive leadership. And 3, sport should maintain proper documents and develop a handover procedure to facilitate a proper and effective change in its executive leadership. One of the other entities that we looked at covered by these reports is the Solid Waste Management Company Limited. And the issue I highlighted here is the sustainability and viability. The committee is very concerned about the sustainability and viability of SWIMCOL after continuous losses were recorded for the period 2010 to 2013. It's noted that in the original accounts for the year financial year 2010, an operating profit of $18 million was recorded and was later restated as an operating loss of $0.5 million in the subsequent year due to the loss of cash flows from the CPEP function of SWIMCOL, which was removed in 2009. So you have a situation where a company reported in its accounts an $18 million profit, but essentially due to an activity completely outside of its remit, it had to restate its account and record a loss. Arising from these actions, the committee has put forward 3 key recommendations. 1, SWIMCOL should reintroduce the vacuum tanker service in an attempt to increase revenues and implement internal control policies to ensure adequate maintenance of its equipment, all of this by July 30, 2017. 2, SWIMCOL should continue the tire shredding initiative in an attempt to boost revenues. And 3, the Ministry of Finance Investments Division should work closely with SWIMCOL by monitoring more effectively the performance and activities of the company. Thank you. This is my contribution on this.
Thank you very much. And I'll now call on Mr. Foster Cummings, who will bring you up to speed on one of the other entities. Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Chairman. I would focus on the committee's deliberations with FIPDECO. The committee was not clear about FIPDECO's practices of recruiting casual workers on an ongoing basis and granting casual employee retirement benefits. The company advised that casual workers are recruited on an as-needed basis based on demand. Moreover, FIPDECO advised the committee that the casual employee retirement benefit was implemented to put these casual workers in a better financial position upon retirement. The structure of this fund is a one-time payment and is determined by a formula set in the collective agreement that takes into account the employee's years of service, salary earned, and number of hours that the employees worked. In considering this issue, the committee recommends the following: that the casual employee retirement benefit be renamed an ex gratia payment, since it is a lump sum payment granted to a retired employee when there is no legal obligation or liability to pay it. The committee further recommends that any employee who has served FIPDECO for a continuous period of over 2 years be offered a more secure position at the establishment. And that would treat with the issue we found stood out in relation to the company FIPDECO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foster Cummings. Well, members of the media, that in essence wraps up our submission as it concerns those 5 reports, the pervasive issues that we identified, and some of the recommendations that we have advanced for consideration by those ministries and state enterprises responsible for the issues that we have identified. So I would like to let you know that, as you were here a short while ago, we examined the accounts of National Gas Company for 2009 to 2015. The next entity that comes before us would be the Telecommunications Services of Trinidad and Tobago, TSTT, followed by Tourism Development Company of TNT, then by Caribbean Airlines Limited, and National Entrepreneurship Development Company Limited. So we're hoping that we would be able to examine the accounts before the end of this session, the remaining entities. But the conference is now open to members of the media who would be desirous of clarifying or asking questions. Anybody would like to ask?
Just before you ask any questions, if you can just identify yourself by name and the media house that you represent.
Jewel Brown from TV6 News. Question to anyone on the committee. How realistic would be your expectations that the recommendations you have provided would actually be implemented?
Well, first of all, under our standing orders, there is a provision that gives the entity in question, which is the state enterprise, through the line minister, 60 days within which to respond to our recommendations. And they must detail how, well, first of all, they have accepted or they have rejected. Then how they are going to implement those recommendations. That must be done in writing, submitted to us as a committee within 60 days of our report being tabled in the Parliament. We then have a responsibility as a committee to exercise a monitoring and oversight role to ensure that those recommendations are in fact implemented by those entities once they have agreed to implement them. So the question here is that so far we have been able to get positive responses from the ministries and the ministers in question with responsibilities for those entities, and we are working very closely with those entities to ensure that those recommendations are in fact implemented.
As an addendum to what the chairman said, by and large, when these state companies come before this committee and we probe and we ask questions and we identify the problems, in most cases, the state enterprises welcome the intervention and the recommendations of this committee and gives it the assurance, the undertaking to implement. So we are here to identify those weak areas in their operations and through our collective experiences would advise on a course of action.
Just to follow up to what Senator Marker just said, that there is the option is available for them to reject. In such an instance, what happens if the recommendations are rejected? 1 and 2, has that happened in your experience?
Well, thus far, we haven't had our committee, I can only speak on behalf of our committee. We have examined in all about, let's say we have about 6 now, and early on about 3, about 9. Thus far, we have not had any rejection, opposition to our recommendations, and thus far we have had a good working relationship with the state enterprises that we have looked after and we have examined with a view to having them implement those recommendations. We have gone a step further. Those entities that have accepted, and most of them have, I would say all of them have accepted with some modifications, and we ourselves will write to those entities where we see weaknesses in their responses and seek to strengthen those weaknesses and have them go along with our recommendation. And we do a monitoring function to see how these recommendations are being effected. Now, we don't have all the necessary staffing to, be monitoring all these entities because, there are over 70 state enterprises in the country. But as far as is practically possible, we do a monitoring function to see how far these entities are going in implementing our recommendations. Remember, our committee exists to help these entities because at the end of the day, we want to improve the delivery of quality goods and services to the country and to the citizenry. So that is our role and function. And as Sister Baptiste has indicated, inevitably you have a situation developing where the enterprises or entities welcome our recommendations and interventions to guide them in better and more efficiently, effectively, and economically executing their functions and their duties and responsibilities to the taxpayers of TNT.
Clint Chantak, Newsday. Just to continue on the same vein that my colleague was going on, but in the rare instances, Mr. Chairman, where the entity is not cooperative, what specific sanctions can the committee impose to ensure or if not enforce compliance, and how much weight do those sanctions carry?
Say is that there is a process called name and shame. We are a microcosm of the Parliament. The Parliament cannot meet 72 members to carry out the work of what we are doing as a small committee. So we have a duty to report our findings and our recommendations to the Parliament. So if there's a rogue element or a rogue state enterprise that is almost defying our recommendations, then we will have to generate reports to the Parliament, and the Parliament that appointed us to this committee will have to debate that report and take decisive action against the entity that is defying or seeking to defy our recommendation. Remember, at the end of the day, a line minister is responsible for these entities or state enterprises, and all of them sit in the both houses of Parliament. So if any entity is defying us, we go to our superiors, those who have appointed us, and to report on those entities that are defying us and seek their guidance as to the way forward. It's the only way we can move forward. The Parliament collectively must take action to bring those entities into line. It's the only way we can go forward.
Yeah, Reatate Express. But to follow your point, very often the naming and the shaming of an entity is almost I don't want to say, very often the people who are facing the committee and accounting for the entity are not the persons who may have violated or have been the rogue elements, as we saw today here, when some of the issues, many of the issues related to a period prior to the persons serving. So in that context, it's really difficult, you know, in bringing people here and having them account for things that have been done not within their time. How does the committee, in looking at such an entity or in looking at these many entities, pull back in some of the individuals who may have been culpable or, you know, I think I'm seeing that as a weakness of the system, because too often it is really, you're doing it after the persons have really gone.
And the reality of what you speak to, Ms. Tate, is something we have to face, and I would speak on behalf of the government. The State Enterprises Performance Manual clearly outlines the parameters within which state enterprises should operate. And I should say that the Prime Minister has issued instructions to the Minister of Finance to instruct all state enterprises that they must adhere to those parameters. Otherwise, if they fail to carry out such guidelines, then of course the Cabinet will have to take decisive action. For example, the State Enterprises Performance Manual indicates that state enterprises should submit financial statements by a particular period of time. I mean, when we sit here as a committee, one of the most irritating factors is that we are in 2017 and we have to look at accounts of 2009, 2008, 2006, and therefore it is historical information we are dealing with. As we go forward, we have to ensure that the present persons who sit on these state enterprises, they understand their roles and function and adhere to those guidelines. And they are going to be held to those guidelines.
Good afternoon, Urvashi from CNC3. I think the conversation is bordering now the power of the committee, and I guess that's what we're asking you, because when you think about it, the enterprises, they do not necessarily have to comply with the recommendations. But just to get back to the submission of documents, you did say, Mr. Chairman, you spoke about strict sanctions for non-compliance as it relates to the submission of documents. Are you all considering stricter sanctions? Are there sanctions? What's in place, and how could we move forward from there?
Well, the committee, as we evolve and as we get feedbacks from these enterprises, we may strengthen, we may tighten our recommendations. So, but for the time being, we talk about imposing stricter sanctions for entities that have defied or have not submitted their audited financial accounts in accordance with the State Enterprises Performance Manual. We may have to come to a point where we will have to recommend that the State Enterprise Performance Manual become a legal document. Because right now it is only a set of guidelines. It is not a legal document as we speak. So maybe as we evolve, if we recognize that there are a lot of shortcomings and deficiencies, we may put our collective heads together and may recommend that we go a step further and call on the Attorney General or the government to make this manual a legal document, an instrument, so that these people and so on who have to adhere, because the point that Mrs. Jennifer Batiste raised a short while ago, and Ms. Ria Tate rather, we are dealing with entities before us in 2017, and we don't have the individuals to come before us who are responsible for those acts. The reason for it is because many of those entities, their reporting mechanism is so backward, and there's no sanction to remove boards or to remove managers, because the State Enterprise Manual says that within 4 months of the end of the financial year, you ought to have that report in the Parliament.
Audited financial.
The audited financial accounts, 4 months after the close of the financial year. What is happening? We are still examining 2009, 2008. These people have left the system. Whereas if it was current, we could have invited these people to come before us and let them account directly for their actions and activities. And that is why the Honorable Batiste indicated that the government is attempting through a mechanism and the Minister of Finance to get these state entities to submit their accounts, their audited financial accounts, on a timely basis. Once that is done, it is referred to us, and we can then call in those entities on a current basis, and not to wait 9 years later or 9 years after, as Ria is alluding to in a short while ago.
Just to clarify, so there's no penalty in place right now if these companies do not submit by that deadline?
There's no penalty in place except to appeal to them as the government is doing. There is a manual that only offers guidelines.
So when you spoke about the strict sanctions, what do you have in mind? What does the
Strict
committee
sanction
have
in the
mind?
context of getting all the players involved to ensure that those recommendations are effective. So once they go to the Minister of Finance, he will call his people together. So the investments division falls under the Minister of Finance. He will recognize that, look, these are serious recommendations. Let us enforce those recommendations so that in the future, we would not have a repeat. He will do what he has to do. But I'm saying, maybe there will come a time in our evolution where we may have to call for this document to be translated or transformed into a legal document so it can have the force of law. Right now, it's moral suasion.
Sorry, Senator, just to clarify, for those of us who are not members of Parliament or attorneys, when you say a legal document, do you mean an act of Parliament?
Yes, in other words, when you talk about a legal document, I'm saying that right now, under the State Enterprise Manual, there's just a guidelines saying that within 4 months at the close of the financial year, you have to submit your financial accounts audited to the Minister of Finance, who in turn will lead in Parliament, refer to us. It is just a guideline. When I talk about legal, I'm saying putting that into legal garments, whether it's in the form of a bill or whatever regulation, whatever form they decide to put it into, but it will have the force of law with appropriate penalties and sanctions for failure. Right now, we don't have those penalties. Right now, we don't have those sanctions. That is the point I'm making.
And just so that I'm clear, are you recommending those penalties be civil penalties or criminal penalties under the law?
I am not recommending this time. I am simply saying that in the evolution, we may put our heads together and get the necessary advice if that becomes necessary. And our advisors will tell us if it is civil, criminal, or a combination of both. We are not in a position to recommend anything along those lines.
I wish to state as an addendum to what the chairman said. A government must govern with moral authority, and therefore it is the government's responsibility to ensure that the persons who are placed on boards, that they operate consistent with the guidelines, and therefore the Minister of Finance, who is the corporation sole, has issued very clear instructions to all state enterprises that they must adhere to, and I dare say they are complying. Quite a number of state enterprises which have come before this committee have indicated to us that their accounts, they are in the process of bringing their accounts up to date. Many of them have actually brought their accounts up to date. It is now to ensure the government, through the Minister of Finance, to ensure that we do not have any rogue state enterprises. Should one or two of them prove to be rogue enterprises, then the Minister of Finance has the power and authority to come to Cabinet to replace those persons on those boards.
Just add that in terms of our deliberations thus far, we have not encountered a situation of a state company not cooperating. As a matter of fact, many of these recommendations we discuss with these entities beforehand, and they have, in many instances, complied with these recommendations, so that we have not had the experience thus far of any rogue state enterprise based on what you're asking.
Follow up, Madam Minister, as the only member of the Cabinet on this committee. What are your thoughts on what Senator Mark has suggested in terms of whether this government or government in the future looking at making the manual, the State Enterprises Manual, a legal document, be it a bill or regulations as opposed to guidelines?
That is a matter that was discussed at the level of this committee, and there was a unanimous position that if that is necessary, then that is the route we'll have to go.
If you allow me, Madam Minister. Again, as a member of the cabinet, you had mentioned in the case of CISL, a company that had been performing functions that are being performed by other companies, and a recommendation that the line minister look at the mandate of the company. We've heard from the Prime Minister as part of the cost reduction exercise of state expenditure, the closing of companies, he said small companies that may not be meeting relevant requirements and so on. Does the report of a committee like this factor into any decisions by the cabinet in terms of the closure of any state enterprises as part of that exercise?
I can't speak to the report of the committee. The report of the committee is with the Honorable Prime Minister, but certainly the cabinet pays attention to the recommendation of that specific committee, and therefore will go along those lines, because the government, in this current environment of economic restraint, the government has to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago gets value for money. And in that context, each one of these state enterprises will be dealt with in its own context.
Unless there are any further questions, may I expressly, on behalf of the members of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, thank all the members of the media for staying back, remaining, to be part of this press conference. We wish you a very great evening, safe journey back to your respective offices, and thanks once again for coming.
Thank you very much.